Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our monthly community practice call. I hope you're all doing well today. My name is Samantha Brewer. I'm the Volunteer Engagement Coordinator with the National Phenology Network. And I'm here with Erin, who's our Outreach Coordinator. And I thought we would start by going around and doing a round of introductions and talking about something recently we may have seen phenology-wise in our areas. So for example, recently I saw, oh shoot, I had it. Oh yeah, one of my queen butterflies emerged from the cocoon. So I haven't seen any monarch caterpillars these past couple weeks, but still my queen became a butterfly and he flew off and did his thing. So that was very exciting. I'll pass it around. Erin, actually, yeah, if you want to introduce I introduced you, but if you want to introduce yourself and talk about something you recently saw in phenology.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Erin, Outreach Coordinator here at the NPN. And one thing that I saw recently, we don't have a lot of fall color here in Tucson, but we do have a couple plants that will change color. And right now we have a limber bush, which is a really cool plant that just went yellow and dropped all of its leaves. It happened really fast within like a week. And then we have another plant called Arizona cotton that turns a bright red with the leaves, which is really unusual for our plants here. And it's just starting to change color. So that's been exciting. Little fall phenology. I will pass it to Elizabeth.
Hello all, my name is Elizabeth Spinney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm part of the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation's Forest Health team. And we are running a phenology monitoring project focused on the phenology of three invasive terrestrial, it's Friday, 3 terrestrial invasive plants. We're looking at Linosora marrowi, Samaros honeysuckle, Rhamnus cathartica, common buckthorn, and Celestris orbiculatus, Asiatic bittersweet. And we have 4 study areas across the state that are part of this LPP. Did I get that right? Yeah. This has been our very first year. So we are going through the growing pains of that, of all learning together what does and doesn't count as for things like bud break and how to use the app. And we're mostly professional observers. We do have a few volunteer observers as well. And we're collaborating with obviously our state government agency, but also a couple of nonprofit organizations that are giving us the space to have our study areas, which we're very appreciative of. And phenology moment. Sorry, Sam, I'm going to use the same one as Tea Tuesday. So I always get really excited for this time of year because the American crow is a fairly solitary bird, but this time of year they tend to start congregating, and in the evening you'll see large flocks of them in what are called staging areas, and they'll form a whole bunch of these different staging areas, and then all those will come together in thousands, if not tens of thousands of birds for the roost, where they will all be together in the thousands overnight and then disperse again for the day. And they do that during the winter. So it's really fun to start to see thousands of crows in different places. Are we popcorning this? Should I pick the next person, or?
Yeah, go ahead and pick the next person. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome. I love hearing about the crows and yeah, that
Sure.
sound when they're all coming. Oh, it's so cool. But yeah, please go ahead and pass on.
How about Kevin and Beth? Nice to see you.
Can you do? Okay. Hi, this is Kevin. Right now I'm looking out our kitchen window at our Coosa dogwood in the backyard, and it's turning in lovely light orange color right now.
But I will say that as far as the trees that we're spotting, we're really winding down. We were going to go after this meeting, but we're down of the 15 trees, or is it 14 or 15, or whatever we look at. We're down to 4, and it's sort of like when those leaves will fall off. But what's been so interesting in this part of Massachusetts is that we didn't get our first frost until it was the beginning of this week or the beginning of last week. So it just really seemed like colors stayed on, and that there were trees that had, I just don't recall seeing those colors. And then some of the trees that I thought, weren't they red last year when they changed, seemed to be yellowish or orangish. And I thought that was interesting too. So it's always interesting, but it's been a beautiful fall also.
You have to pick somebody.
Oh, you pick.
Who haven't we heard from?
Well, how about Laura Bishop?
Okay, Laura.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura, also known as Gail Bishop, and I'm down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and I'm the coordinator for the Gulf Coast Phenology Trail. One of the things that we look at is a Yopon holly, Ilex vomitoria, and it's got a great natural history, but they are bright red. I've been watching them all summer, little bitty berries, and they finally got big, and they are just gorgeous. But about this plant is the holly that is the only naturally caffeinated holly that you can make tea out of. So, I haven't tried it, but I got a package, but it has a long history. So if you have a chance to look that up, it's kind of controversial now. So it's good to be here, and I'm going to choose Rosemary.
Thank you. I'm Rosemary Jan. This is my first year leading a project for a team of my fellow master naturalists in Arlington, Virginia. The learning curve has been steep. And I just had to confess to Erin this week that I misidentified 2 of our maples, but luckily the real species are ones in the Green Wave database, so no huge harm done. We had a long dry spell in August and September, and it's really taken a lot of color out of the leaves for us this year. Our maples, except for our silver maple that we're monitoring, have dropped already. The oaks are still holding on though, and one of them has barely started to change at all. So in the neighborhoods around Arlington, most of the trees have dropped their leaves early, but in the parklands that we're monitoring in, it hasn't been quite so early.
That's great.
That leaves Lindsay, I think.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Rist. I'm with the Ohio Division of Wildlife. We started a monitoring program in the fall of 2019. I'm mostly working with teachers and some non-formal educators to get monitoring implemented at their, so we have a program called Wild School Sites that will help create habitat on their grounds. And so of course, since that was right before the pandemic and then the students weren't in the schools, I currently only have one teacher who's still been monitoring. He came in by himself. He's been on some of these calls before too, kept up with that monitoring, and his students have been continuing to monitor since they've been back in the building. I got a chance to visit with them last week. I'm actually going to share their phenology observation this year. So they have 10 trees at their school, and this was the first year they noticed not a single one of them produced any fruit. And so some of them are northern red oak, and so they're on a cycle anyway for mass production, but this was the first time that theirs had not produced fruit. So looking at that longer term data to figure out like what the cycles are for their trees and stuff. So that was really interesting. I thought just, because they're kind of like, why are we still collecting this data? It's new students now, that didn't start with the program. They're like, well, we still have to do this for Mr. Baker. And so pulling in some of that. So then we started playing with some of the data that we could download from the system too, and thinking about like, how many days does a tree have mast on it, and hard mast versus soft mast, and just pulling in some of that kind of stuff. So it's been kind of exciting again to get to, because I don't typically get to work with the students and stuff, but like go to the school and visit with them and hear about their observations and what kind of questions we can ask has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Lindsay. That's awesome. Well, I mean, yeah, especially with the students and you're like, yeah, why are we doing this? And it's like, oh, look, there's something different. Now we can look at patterns. That's great.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you. All right, so today what we're going to talk about is it is the time of year for gathering data and annual reports and annual surveys. So we're going to kind of talk about what to expect, and also we're going to go over a little bit of the visualizations that you guys can make, and we're going to go over our report guide that we have at the USA Phenology Network that we've written up to kind of help people organize their reports, especially if you've never written a report before in general, but also it's like, what should I report on for the phenology data and the work that we've done? And so it's a nice guide. I've used it before to write phenology reports for my program. And even though it is a little bit outdated, one of our projects is to be able to update it, but I think it still is relevant and applicable and can still be used to kind of summarize the work that you've done and that your volunteers have done throughout the year. So the first thing I'm going to go over is the report guide. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go to the chat and I'm going to add it as an attachment to the chat. And once let's see, here it is. So it's in the chat. You guys should be able to open it. And I'm also going to share my screen and show it to you guys. I'm not going to go over the whole report guide because it is a big document. But I do want to just kind of go over the basics and ways that you guys can use it. There we go. To be able to write reports and be able to summarize your data. So are you guys able to see this okay? Give me a thumbs up if you're able to see it. Okay, perfect. So this is our annual report guide. And it's a nice guide because then you can kind of pick and choose what kind of aspects of your program you wanted to talk about. It helps you organize like what visualizations you want to put in there. And it's handy for being able to navigate the website and being able to find some of these resources for the visualizations that you guys are going to be able to use. So when I go to the table of contents, that's just what I'm going to go over rather quickly. It really is the table of contents and what's available for you guys in this report guide, just so you're able to kind of organize your thoughts. So what we have in this guide is kind of like why you would want to write a phenology report for one. Some of you may do annual reports, some of you may not. And some of you may send your reports to us, and we love it when you do that because it's an opportunity for us to see what you guys have done throughout the year. So a phenology report is also really nice for your volunteers or any of your constituents or stakeholders so that they know, what you've been doing with your phenology program and what you've learned and what you want to do moving forward. There's no this is a nice guide, but this isn't this is exactly how your report must be, because just like each of your programs is a little bit different and unique, each of your reports is a little bit different and unique. And it's not the sort of thing where it's like you're required to write a report for us every year. But like I said, it is nice, and it's nice for you to be able to kind of every year think about what your program has done and what you want to do moving forward. Parts of a report that are nice to include, you might want to have when you're starting your report is writing a description of your program, why you're doing the program, right? So when someone's reading your report, it's like, why am I reading this? Why are you guys doing this? So a little bit of a description of what your plan for your program is and why you're doing your program. There's also an observation quantity and observer activity. We're going to go over where you guys can see that, but that kind of shows how many observations, this is how many observations were collected. These are what our observers were doing, how many volunteers we had, how many regular volunteers. So you can actually kind of look at volunteer retention, who kept coming back. You can look with that, tracking individual observers. I don't know how much you want to put on what each individual observer did, but especially for you, when you're thinking about your reports, are the observers coming back? Are observers only coming once? And also this information is confidential. So it's not going to put the name of your observers. Whenever someone signs up for Nature's Notebook, they get a random observer number, and that's what shows up. You guys could figure out as admins of your local phonology program, you can look up like the observer number tied to the email of your volunteers if you are curious about individuals, but that's not something that's publicly available. You can look at it also shows you how to use the visualization tools. So different visualization patterns that you can use to report on like when certain plants were flowering or when leaves were changing colors. Phonology calendars and how to summarize data using phonology calendars. Looking for presence and absence or presence and activity of species at locations or regions. And being able to compare them between years. So some of you, this is your first year, but some of you have been going for multiple years, and you can actually look at like, here's what we collected this year, here's how it compares to previous years, and being able to look at those longer term patterns. And also between geographic locations, so you can look at, you know, species presence in different locations and compare that to your sites or between your sites. Looking at scatter plots and patterns, like I can show you a little bit about our scatter plots, so you can actually tie your data in with different climate data or latitudinal data. And other data summaries that you can use using the Phonology Observation Portal. We won't look at the Phonology Observation Portal today, but just know that is a research where you can actually download a spreadsheet of your data. I might give you the link briefly, but yes, you can actually, like, if you wanted to use a spreadsheet and get a little bit more into the data, you can use that with the Phonology Observation Portal. Ways to look at climate data. And so then once you have all these visualizations, like here's all the data that we collected, here are the things we saw. You can have a section like this is what the results mean. These are some lessons that we learned throughout the years. So sometimes like here's some of the particular challenges we have. And some of you mentioned that in your introduction, right? Like, yeah, this was our first year and these were some challenges we had. So it's a nice space to be able to reflect and think about how your program went and what you would want to do moving forward into the next year with your program. Here, if you want, you can include some education and outreach activities that your program did. You can even have an appendix if you wanted to that has like the actual like files of the activities that you did, if anyone in the future who's doing your program wants to be able to find those. And then use a summarize of your report and what you're planning to do. Location of project components. And so also I like having an appendix to, like, if any of your observers submitted photos, like here's some photos that, you know, our observers submitted, so that they can get a little like appendix with some of the pictures of the phonology that happened at your site and be able to like kind of give a shout out to some of your volunteers is another aspect that you can kind of add to your report. The first thing that I want to go over today of like being able to build your report and doing some of your visualizations is going to be how to track your observers and see what your observers were doing. So I'm going to stop sharing real quick because I'm going to pull that up. And I guess before I pull that up, I'll take a second for questions about the report guide. And I see I actually have a written question. What's the timeline for getting reports in each year? And can you touch on how projects that go year round report by calendar year? So generally we'll put out an email, and Erin, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but generally in December, we'll put out an email where we'll say like, hey, it's time for writing your reports. And also we'll put out a survey for local phonology leaders to complete. And the survey is really nice because it's, again, a chance to reflect on your program, what some of the goals of your program were, and it helps give us some feedback on the resources that we provide you guys and ways that we can help you guys. So it's a chance for us also to hear from you about like, these were some challenges I had, like, or is there a resource where, you know, are there different activities, or this is an activity that I made and I wanted to share it with you guys, or if you wanted to include a PDF of your report, that's an opportunity to do so. Also with your surveys, you have a chance to say like, hey, I've been doing my program for 2 years and I would like to apply for the Pheno Champion Award. So what the Pheno Champion Award is, if you've been running your program for 2 years or you've been collecting data for 2 years, everyone who applies, we kind of look at their programs and we send an award, and we send you guys some swag. Last year we did some customized t-shirts for the volunteers. What are some other options that we have for the Pheno champions, Erin, if you don't mind reminding me for that?
Yeah, so we have you can choose between a trail sign, which is it was designed by our graphic designer that we contract with. It's really beautiful, and it can kind of describe what you're doing at your program, and then list some of like the species you're observing. So we can help you customize that, and then we pay for the printing of it for you. Or you can choose a set of kind of like the merch that Sam was describing, like t-shirts or Nature's Notebook gear for I think it's up to 10 of your observers.
And I think we generally ask for those back sometime in January. Reports also don't have to be annual reports. Like I always think of annual reports, but some of you might have a lot of gumption and maybe you do quarterly reports or even monthly reports. But the guide is what it is. It's a guide. And so it's just to help you kind of organize your thoughts and think about what you want to put in there. I had never written a phenology report before, and it was just so helpful. There were a couple sections that I had added for my own program that were helpful. And there were a couple of those sections where I was like, I don't really need this for the report for my program. So it's just kind of there to help you guys think about what you'd like to do for a report. Any other questions about like the report guide or reports in general or annual surveys in general? But you guys will be seeing those in your inboxes soon for the surveys. Rosemary, you're muted, but I see you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So we don't have to write something for every section. We can pick and choose which sections we want to respond to or include in our reports. Okay, good.
Yep, absolutely. Especially because once again, it's not a requirement. It's not like we're like, you didn't submit a report and you know you're not going to be able to collect anymore. It's nothing like that. It really is it's a resource to help you guys be able to organize and engage with your volunteers and engage with your stakeholders or your donors or anyone else who would like to know how your program's going regularly. So yeah, this is just to help you organize that, especially if you haven't written a lot of reports before. And then I have a question too of, is there a way that we can submit to call attention to specific observers? I don't know if we have something for specific observers on our site, Erin, but certainly you could do that with your own local phenology program, and especially in your, if you're like, oh, annual reports, and it's part of your annual report of like, you know, observer of the year is so-and-so, like that's an excellent way to be able to recognize people who've done a lot of hard work at your program. Erin, is that something we used to do with specific observers or?
No, we haven't. I mean, we have our leaderboards page where you can look up and see it's like the observer who's contributed the most data, but it's overall across Nature's Notebook per year, month, and that might be it. And all time, I guess, is the other one. But yeah, it's a nice idea. I think it's definitely something you could do for your own program.
I'm just going to post the leaderboard right here because I do think it's kind of fun. But there's our leaderboard if you're ever curious. And this just puts on the observers. It has their username and then the number of observations and whatever badge they've recently. There's a lot of Cricket Quest badges actually I see up there right now, which is kind of fun. All right, so next thing I'm going to share is the group's dashboard. And I'm going to link the group's dashboard right here. And this is where you can look up your program and be able to look at what your observers are doing. So the group's dashboard, and this link is in that guide. But I put on the Reed Park Zoo Pollinator Garden because that's the local phenology program that I used to run. So it's the one that I often like think about, and I'm just kind of familiar with that, super familiar with that program. So I threw that one up here, and I know they're still doing their program. But I can look up the phenology program. So whichever one of your phenology programs, you can search for it. Or no, you can't. Is it just a scroll? It's a scroll. But you can click and you can actually compare your phenology program with other phenology programs. So you can choose your program. And then I think the default on this one, there's like an Audubon group that's defaulted, and you can unclick the Audubon one and then click on your program. And then you can choose what year. So you can look at all years. This one's been going on for 2 years. So you can choose which years you want to look. Because once again, it's kind of nice with all, because then you can compare what is happening this year compared to previous years. Has your engagement increased? Has your engagement decreased? And then that's really good information for you too, because then you're like, oh, I've gotten this many more volunteers, or I've gotten fewer volunteers. Like maybe we need to rethink ways that we're engaging with people and bringing them in. Oh, and it put on Audubon California again when I put on all. So I don't want all of Audubon California. I want to go back down to.
With the years too, we actually, we just started restricting it to just 2021 and 2022 because there's just so much data. We can't have all the years on there. So even if you have data from before 2021, you can only look at the last 2 years. But we thought like mostly the purpose of this is to help with creating annual reports. So you have like over a year after the last year to make yours before that data kind of are more hidden. And then the other thing I'll say here is if you're part of one of those regional efforts like Gail with the Gulf Coast Phenology Trail, either select Gulf Coast Phenology Trail at that level or select one of the subgroups. But if you check both, you'll get like a double count. So if you just want to look at like one of the sub LPLs under, just check that, or check the larger group in the hierarchy. And you should be able to type in, I think, in that space.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, yeah.
There it is. So like if you looked up Gulf Coast, there we go. All right. So thank you, Erin, because I didn't know that about the only 2 years, just because this one's only been going. I guess we did have a little data in 2020. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Oh, and there it is, only available for 20. So, but anyway, you can look at your site name. So here, this is the local phenology program. Here are the 2 sites that they have at that program. And then month by month, here are the records that were collected. And then here too, you can look at records by species. So how many records were collected for each species. This one I want to note also can be a little bit, you might want to note that for records like monarch, it says like 675 records, whereas pine needle milkweed, it only says 261, but that can involve like how many phenophases are available for that species. So like with monarchs, there's more phenophases available to take records of than the pine needle milkweed. So the pie chart can be a little bit, it can look a little biased towards one species or another. It just depends on how many phenophases are there. And then also phenophase category, you can see like if how much records were collected on activity, development, flowers, fruits. So just different phenophase categories is another visualizations that can be there. And then you have visits by month. So how many times someone visited your site, or how many, how many times someone visited your site. So here at their health center milkweeds that they were collecting data for, and they started this one to participate in the oh my gosh, the monarch program that we're doing that I just collected data for.
Desert Refuge.
Yes, thank you. The Desert Refuge project. They're collecting data on monarchs because they participate in Monarch Safe, and also we have Desert Refuge to see what monarchs are doing in Arizona. So they added a site for the milkweeds by their health center. So how many observations, and this is total observations. And then in their pollinator garden, so with their health center, for example, it's only their education employees who monitor the health center, but they have volunteers and docents that come and record what's going on in their pollinator garden. So they have more visits here because they have more volunteers that go to this site. But it's nice to compare the two also, and being able to know like, okay, good, we had people coming regularly to these sites. It looks like they just started training their volunteers again in July. And then here's active, oh, and here's Audubon, California again. So I can go back to Reed Park Zoo. And then it'll update it. It does that fairly quickly too, which is nice. And it oh, it's still Audubon. Oh, because I have to unclick Audubon. Unselect Audubon and select Reed Park Zoo. There we go. And so here's how many active observers. So the different, so here it's showing you, right, how many or how many visits there were, but this is how many observers came to the pollinator garden. And then this also shows like how many records the different observers collected. So this person, the blue person, like was coming in pretty regularly, and whoever was orange came in. Maybe they dropped off a little bit in September, but then they were coming back again. And then it looks like they had a new volunteer who appeared, who was starting in September. And then the total number of records contributed by each observer. So once again, if you wanted to highlight like, ooh, who is the observer who collected the most records? Here I could take so like me, who's just like randomly on here. I can't see who that observer is, but as an admin, you can say like, you can collect this observer number, and then you can go and manage your users, and you can find out the user ID based on the email. And if you want a way to celebrate whoever had the most records, you're able to do that. Does anyone have any questions about the groups dashboard and being able to use this information about what your volunteers or what your observers or students even were contributing to the data? And I can't see everybody because I've got my share screen, but it's okay if you unmute yourself and shout out.
Yeah, I pulled it up. Unfortunately, the students don't have access to their own computers, so it's the teacher that's entering all of it, so it all shows up under his name. But maybe that's something we can address in the future.
And that's actually not a bad thing either, because like I said, it all depends. So maybe you like if for your program, you don't necessarily want to record like how many active observers, because that might not be what's important, but you can still say like, you know, here's how we were getting observations regularly, and we were visiting regularly. And so that can be something that if it was something that you feel like you should report on, at least then too, you can track like, okay, good, we were visiting 4 times a month. Or if you're like, oh, we were really cutting back in July because there were no students, you know, that's something you can still acknowledge and be like, and we had no students in July, so there were no observers.
Yeah.
Samantha, this is Rosemary. You put the link for this, the how to find the dashboard for your program is in the annual report document.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And where it is in the document, it should be under the section for observation quantity, page 11 to 13. Let me double check that.
Okay.
It is on actually at the bottom of page 10 is the link for that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. Any other questions for this dashboard?
There are a couple in the chat. Gail had asked about like how to see the overall numbers about how many people participated. So I put a link to the dashboard, which is our data dashboard, kind of shows like overall numbers across years for the whole Nature's Notebook program. And then Elizabeth asked about what counts as a record, and that's just one of the yes or no answers from one of the questions on the data sheet. So for some calls, you get 12 records, some it's 5, and some it's more. Kind of depends on how many questions are on the data sheet and whether they answered all of them.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I was seeing like that chart and like 150, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of visits. But okay, so it's individual phases observed or not. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, so like this one says 2,706. So this individual, I don't think went there 2,706 times, but especially like if you're doing like an animal and the animal wasn't present. And so, or like let's say you did have a monarch and all you saw was one caterpillar. So you marked everything else as no, and then the caterpillar was yes, all those no's are also records. Because no's are still important, because it's still important to see like what was present and what was absent. So it's funny because we still sometimes you think about like, oh, the no, you know, oh, there's nothing going on, but those no's still matter and scientists can still use those. And especially when you're going from winter to spring and it's like dormant, dormant, no leaves, no leaves, no leaves. And now you've got the breaking leaf buds. Being able to see that is really important. Any other questions? All right, so then can you guys see the visualization tool from here? if when I switch my tab, okay, good. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, so the visualization tool, whenever I try to share it on Zoom, it's super, super, super slow. So I just pulled one up ahead of time so that you guys don't have to wait while it thinks about things. But the visualization tool, I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna put this in the chat. But this is how you can make nice visualizations for the data that everyone's collected. So this one, I didn't pick a particular program, but this is just like red maple, for example. I was like, oh, maples and leaf colors changing. And right now, just so you're aware, we do have there's a bug where the 2022 data isn't quite showing up, but we're aware of that and we're fixing it right now. But for example, for 2021 with the red maples, it's kind of neat because you can see like there's the leaves that showed up with the maples and they had leaves. And here it's nice because then you can see, oh, now we're seeing more reports of colored leaves. And then I like that they both go down at the same time because it's showing like more and more and more colored leaves, or it's the proportion of like records. So it's the percent of leaf reports that were colored. And then as the leaves fall off, now you're getting trees that are just getting no's for leaves. And as it's going down, they go down together as the leaves, because you're still getting leaves. Now you're knowing that a higher percentage of them are colored leaves. And then we're getting more no reports as the leaves fall. So activity curves are really nice to be able to show like how the phenophases changed. The activity curves are also really nice because you can actually go and compare years. So if I go to this curve, I could actually add a curve and I could say, all right, in 2020, what was happening? And so, oh, see, that's thinking. All right, but red maple. And I can go to, let's do colored leaves again. And I'm going to do orange this time. And so you can compare in 2020, this is what was going on and how people were recording the colored leaves of the red maples. And then this is what happened, or here's 2020 and here was 2021. So you can kind of see those differences between years. So especially for multiple years and doing those comparisons. Oops, and I wanted to do proportion yes records. Sometimes you want to do total yes records for your site, like how many monarchs were seen, but sometimes it's like what proportion of the records were yes records, and so proportion is nice. So now it's a little more, now that I changed to proportion, we're seeing similar patterns between the years, which is really, really cool. There are other types of visualizations that you can do. You can make a map, and the map is really neat because you can choose on the map what you want to do. I'm going to go to 2021 and let's do that red maple again. And let's do the colored leaves again. And what this will show, and hopefully it shows fast, is it'll show when people first there we go. There's where everyone was recording the colored leaves for the red maples. And what's important about this map, and this is also why it's nice, it's important to regularly collect data, is all of these were when a yes was reported after a no was reported. So that way we know that within 30 days, this is when colored leaves first started to appear with the red maples. And so you can see that they started appearing around that kind of autumny time. And you can even get more. So here's with 7 days. So with this visualization, if you want it to be a little bit more precise, this is when people reported yes within 7 days after reporting a no for colored leaves with the maples. And then you can also make a scatter plot. And a scatter plot is kind of nice because then we can look at, oh, I'm not going to look at 20. Oh, scatter plots, this one's always a little weird for me. So let's do 2021 though. And, because that's from 2021. Erin, will you mind doing the scatter plot for me? Because this is always the one
Yeah. Well, I think it's fine to just look at 1 year. Like if you were going to make an annual report for 2021 and you wanted to compare your red maple phenology to something like an abiotic variable, which could be a temperature variable or something else, then you're just looking at that 1 year. And there's kind of some nice features here. So it'll take it. Oh, it actually loaded faster than I thought. Red maple, there are a lot of data for those. So, so again, and you can change that precision filter, like Sam was talking about for the last one, where you're limiting how many onsets you're looking at by the days since the prior no. So if you want to look at only the ones where you know that the first yes happened within a week rather than 30 days, then you can restrict it. And then, yeah, you can change the variable that you're kind of looking at the relationship between the onset of colored leaves and something else. And latitude is one thing, but then all the temperature variables are on there as well. So you can kind of think about like, what do you think would impact the onset of colored leaves? Maybe it's the summer temperature, maybe it's the amount of rainfall, something like that. So you can kind of play around with those different seasonal summaries for climate. And then fitting a line will show you kind of a simple way. It's a R² value, which is showing what is the relationship between these two things. Is it a good relationship, which means a higher R² value versus a not as good relationship? And then if we did have one, this is like a little bit better relationship with the 0.32. That's like actually not bad for ecological data. And so that's showing us that when the fall minimum temperatures are lower, you have an earlier onset of colored leaves. And then when the fall temperatures are higher, colored leaves start later. So that's kind of, I think it kind of makes sense. The fall, I don't know, fall is generally like summarized by September. Is it September to December? So that might be like after a lot of colored leaves. So yeah, I probably would look at summer temperatures. That's a pretty good relationship too. So, you know, lower minimum summer temperatures are related with are related to earlier onset of colored leaves. So you can play around with the different variables. There's also things like elevation. We saw latitude. If you did plot multiple years, you can actually plot years, so you can see how the onset of the colored leaves changes across years. And then you go to back to the, after it loads, that's a lot more data. Back to looking at the abiotic variable and select years from the drop down, and it'll put years across the x-axis. Yeah, it's a lot. So if you go to next and then change, oh, that one, yeah, that's good. So next, and then the x-axis up at the top, change that to years, a year. Yeah, and that'll show you like if there was a climate change signal here, you might see that like things were advancing across years. That's kind of hard to see with only a few years of data, but yeah, there's lots of things to play around with. Another thing you can do is that from to, that is a nice way to kind of restrict, because sometimes, you know, people might report colored leaves for red maple when they first start coming out of the leaf buds and they look kind of red. And if you want to say like, I don't want to see anything before July, you could say like, I'm going to go from July 1st to December 31st or something, and kind of like limit it that way. So you could, yeah, if you drag it all the way up, like that, where it says May, yeah, to December, and then drag the bottom one, then you're only looking at like true fall colored leaves, you know, and that can sometimes clean up the graph a little bit and take out some of those errors. Yeah, any questions about that? I think Elizabeth had a question about, not sure. So I think you asked that question when we were looking at the activity curves. So the activity curves actually don't show the intensity data. We actually don't have a visualization that shows the intensity data, and we'd love to. So we're actually working on a way to summarize. We're calling it peak phenometrics, but looking at like the maximum percentage of open flowers and a way to visualize that. So we're hoping to have that maybe coming next year. But the activity curves do show kind of the magnitude or the proportion of the yes records in relation to the no's. So it's giving you more information about, you know, not just whether or not someone said yes, but like how many people said yes on any particular week or month. And so for the not sure's, which is when you circle that question mark, we actually don't show those. Those kind of get thrown out in the visualization tool because we don't know where to put them, whether yes or no. So.
But that doesn't mean unsures aren't important, right? Because yeah, like even though it doesn't show up in the visualization, it's still like you still know someone was there, you still know someone was reporting, and yeah, maybe it's someone going through those growing pains and learning it. I had on one of my milkweeds, I wasn't sure because it was the first time I'd seen fruits on it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure these are fruits that are forming. I'm not sure. And so then I did unsure for those. And then I went back and I was like, okay, I know for a fact now those were fruits. And now I can say yes for fruits on those. So the question marks and the unsures are still really important. There's one that I have, a pine needle milkweed, and it always asks for like the canopy cover. And I'm like, you know what, I just really don't know. So I just always mark unsure for that. And that's fine too, because I get so much other data from it. So, yeah.
I know that there's this is Rosemary. I know that there's a video, like a video of how to use the visualization tool. Could you remind us where to find that if we need a brush up?
Yes, I think it is right. Yes, here's the webinar recording. It's on a YouTube video, and I'm going to put that in the chat right now. And all these links, by the way, when I put it on YouTube, I'll include all these.
Why should you use Miro?
Whoops.
On a whiteboard.
Just YouTube. All right, so here it is. And this is also found on the visualization tool, the phenology visualization page. I'll show you guys. But if you want to find that recording again, it's right here. And there's just a few different like types of visualizations, and it shows you, oh, I didn't show you the calendar, but I don't have time. But there's also a calendar, which is really cool because these grays are all the no's and these are all the yeses. So you can see when people were recording no and when people were recording yes. And it's nice too, because when the no's are grayed out, you can see like, yep, people were there all the time. And so we know this is when there were yeses and we know this is when there were no's. So it's kind of a neat other visualization that you can include in your reports.
My other question was, is there a way to use the visualization tool to find out which of your observers were outliers in terms of getting stuff right? That is, I've got 9 people I'm working with, plus myself. 5 are on one set of sites and 4 are on the other. I think that some people were less accurate than others. And, I tried to check people's results as they were coming in over the summer and pinpoint things that people were getting wrong, like saying there were colored leaves, but not saying there were leaves, things like that. But is there any way that you can use the visualization tool to do that kind of comparison? I mean, I'm just sort of wanting to know, I got one team to share their results with one another, take screenshots of what they had observed and send them to others in the group. I couldn't get the other group to do that. And I think it's in that other group where there were some kind of random results from week to week. And I'd just like to assess how bad a problem that was.
Yeah, that some of Ellen Denny is our monitoring data and design coordinator. That's her dream, is to have a visualization where you could see an outlier and then you could see who collected that data point, and then at least like the ID, and then get in contact with them. So that's definitely something on our radar. And I think also with our data analysis guidance, which is a project we're doing next year, where we're going to help all of you, interpret and understand your data and answer the questions that you have that kind of inspired your programs. We'll be thinking more about tools for that. We don't really have something like that right now. The best thing I can suggest is using the tools that Sam mentioned, the phenology calendar, the activity curves, and looking for outliers, and then figuring out, you can hover over the graphs to see like the actual date that was recorded. So figure out, what was the, write down the species and the date, and then download the data file for your local phenology program and look up and see who was the person that recorded that data point, and then contact them that way. If you go down to on the features, like more of a fine scale, like weekly, sometimes that'll kind of make it easier. I think it's under the features. That can make it a little bit easier to see like where those outliers might be happening. It'll show you. This one, I mean, there's so much data for this one, but like that little blip maybe in like early February, that little guy, like maybe that would be something where you would zoom in on that. That happened between February 5th and February 11th, and you could download the data file and see who is the person that recorded it that week. And
Mhm.
then, you know, that'll have the observer ID, and then you can use that with your group roster from your manage users page and then figure out who that person was. But I think
Thanks, that's,
with,
that's really
yeah,
helpful.
those kind of things, it's probably best to do it more often than on an annual basis, because I imagine, you know, if you contacted that observer and it was like December, they might not remember what happened in February. So I think our recommendation would be, if you want to do that kind of data quality check, which is awesome if you want to do it, maybe to do it on like a quarterly basis, and then you can check in and they might remember like, oh yeah, maybe I didn't report that in the right way.
So, I mean, what I have been doing is going onto my observation deck, choosing an observer and downloading their data into a spreadsheet. But which is super cumbersome. Is there some faster way for me to see that from week to
So
week?
there's a link to download group data on that same manage users page, and that'll give you everything. And I think it actually has, I can't remember if it's the email or the username, because that's like, you know, your own data file that only you as an administrator can see. That's an easier way to see the, you know, without having to do that comparison of the observer ID back to the roster. So that'll give you all the observers data.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going to my.
Gail had a question about, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm going to my observation deck to show that. So go ahead.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I was just gonna say, Gail asked a question about when you have like species that overlap calendar years, that's kind of tough too. And I think the best thing to do is just have those both of the years on the graph, and then you can kind of like see. I've also seen people download a 2021 and a 2022 graph and then in PowerPoint like smush them together. So you can kind of see like where one, you know, the curve starts to go up for flowering and then it continues. But yeah, we don't have a way to like change the year. We do in the download tool where you can download the filtered data sets. You can say like, I want to look at this on a calendar, or a water year where it starts October 1st. But we've thought about maybe doing that in the viz tool someday, where you could change, you know, how that calendar is shown, but we don't have a way to do that yet.
And so, and also I'm just going to share my screen real quick just to show you guys where you can get the data just for your program. Because right, I was on the visualization tool. I'm like, this is like the red maple across the country. But if you go to your observation deck, you can go down here to manage users. And then down here, there's like your group roster, your group data, filter data, visualizing your group data. So if I go to visualize group data here, I was in the Reed Park Zoo pollinator garden. And it's thinking, but that's where it actually goes to your phenology program's data specifically. So it's thinking about it, so I won't make it like do that forever, but yeah, that's a way that you can download your data and visualize your group's data right here as well. Does anyone have any more? We've got about 4 minutes left. Thank you guys for being here. If any of you have any more questions, please let us know. Also with these visualizations, like I said, those those annual reports, excuse me, with those annual reports, if there's anything in these dashboards that you would like to see, that's a really good opportunity to say like, hey, I'd also like to be able to, you know, see the outliers, and because we use those, we use that feedback to kind of think about projects that we want to use moving forward. Like Erin said, like we want to work on being able to like find ways to help you analyze your data. And that was because we got feedback from local phenology leaders saying like, hey, we could really use a tool to help us do this. So all your feedback is really important to us, and the work that you do is just really important to us, and we appreciate you guys. Anything
This
else?
has been super, super helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you are so welcome. And that's another thing too, I guess, with these community practice calls, like usually we try to invite a guest or come up with our own like ideas of what we want to talk about. But if you guys are like, hey, can we talk about this in the monthly call? We will absolutely schedule, and you can just email Erin or I, and we'll be like, yeah, absolutely, we can talk about that. And so, or if you want to just like talk about your program and the things your program has done or lessons that you've learned, or if you're looking for feedback, if you're like, hey, we really have this challenge and I'd like to hear from other group leaders of how you overcame this challenge, all that is welcome. You can just email Erin or I, and we'd be happy to set that up.
Hey, Samantha, I have one thing to say. I've been doing my report for 5 years and it has gotten quite lengthy. So it's up to 45 pages, but that's just a lot of data that I can't stop writing. But this is what Erin helped me with, is just to write an abstract, because I don't think everybody's going to pour over everything. But if they just, this, like the short things that happened, this happened, we're observing this, we have, just a kind of a summary in the front of the report. We're trying that one. So
Yeah.
That's actually a really good idea. So maybe when we're updating the report guide, maybe that's a section we should add as like the abstract at the beginning, so that, yeah, if someone can just have that quick look. Thank you. That's a really good idea. Yeah, especially when you have a lot of data that you're sharing. Then they don't have to go all the way down to the end of the summary. Get it at the beginning. Thank you. Any other questions or comments or feedback? Otherwise, I'll let you guys loose. I hope you all have a good, we've got Thanksgiving coming up next week. So hope you guys enjoy your holidays, whatever holidays you celebrate coming up. We'll see you guys again in September, or I'm so tired, in December. And you guys all just have a really great, rest of your month. We'll see you next month. Thank you all so much. I'll stop recording, but I'll hang out for a minute in case any of you have any additional questions.